all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Welcome to Veterans Radio. I am Jim Fossone. I'm the officer of the deck today. We've got some great programs for you. I think you'll find very interesting. We always want to remind you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or by going to veteransradio.net, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.net. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We also want to thank our latest national sponsor, Veteran Lending Council. It is a community dedicated to educating lenders, realtors, and veterans on the VA Home Loan Benefit Program. You can check them out on Facebook and other social media outlets. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Tom Clavin. Tom is a prolific author. We've had him on before talking about some of his writing. We had him back on a long time ago, May of 2014, on his book Last Men Out, a true story of America's heroic final hours in Vietnam. Tom, welcome back to Veterans Radio.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me back.
Well, we're going to talk about a book that's coming out to the uttermost ends of the earth, the epic hunt for the South's most feared ship and the greatest sea battle of the Civil War, which I'd never really heard about. So this is one of those things where this is how you get the history you never got in school, by listening to Veterans Radio and reading some of the great books and authors that we bring to you. And you had a writing partner on this, Phil Keith. Phil was also on Veterans Radio back in October of 2013 on his book, Black Horse Riders. Both of you guys are pretty prolific authors. Phil's now passed away. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your writing partner here?
Well, Phil and I had gotten to be friends, I'm going to say, probably about 15 years ago. I was doing a writing workshop, and he came in to participate in the writing workshop. As some people may recall who listened to his interview on the network, he had served 3 tours in Vietnam. He was a fighter pilot. And then he wanted to try his hand at writing. He had been writing, but he was actually working on a novel at the time, and he wanted some help in this workshop try to finish that up. But as I got to know him better, and then the workshop was over, but we started to become friends and became better and better friends, and ultimately very, very good friends. And I remember, I'm glad you mentioned Black Horse Riders, because I said to Phil, I really think you have a really strong strength for nonfiction writing. I mean, nothing against your fiction writing, and if that's what pleases you the most, then keep going. But I said, I bet if you found the right story, you could really sink your teeth into it. And as it happened, this was probably 2010-ish. I picked up a newspaper that day, and there was a photograph of President Obama presenting the Presidential Unit Citation to a number of men who had been in this company in Vietnam their heroism in this battle had gone overlooked for 40-something years. So they're finally getting their due. And I called Phil and I said, "Did you see the paper this morning?" He said, "Yep." He said, I'm thinking the same thing." And so he started looking into this story, which eventually became Black Horse Riders. He did a great job, I thought. He did a follow-up to that, was Firebase Illingworth, and And so we were not writing partners, but very good friends. And then we sort of both at the same time found out about this fellow Eugene Bullard, and we said, let's try and work together. And that sounds like it's a casual thing, but it's not. They say you shouldn't go into business with friends.
Right.
And writing a book together is going into business. You might spend the next year or two working together and sometimes disagreeing on where you're going. And there is money involved, and you figure out the contract, who gets what. There's all kinds of things to it. But we so enjoyed our experience with what became the All Blood Runs Red, which was published in 2019, that we thought, well, if another story comes along, and Phil, again, being a Navy man, we started to research the story about the Civil War battle between the CSS Alabama and the USS Kearsarge, and that was right up his alley. And so we said, okay, let's do another book together. And our publisher was delighted because they were very happy with the way All Blood Runs Red turned out. And so we did this book together as a good amount of research, and Phil, did a fantastic job, because there's so much of the jargon in the book that's about 1860s boats and sailing.
Right.
And of course, his mind was picked that up right away. Some of it he already knew, of course, having been 25 years in the Navy. So we really enjoyed working on this book together, and it was a story we thought many people did not know about, and unfortunately, Phil, a number of ailments started to pile up on him, and he passed away on March 10th of last year.
Yeah, way too early. He was only 74 years old. I'm sure he had a lot of good books left in him. He had written on the USS Lexington. He had written a great story, or a great book, the stories of the Medal of Honor winners from Harvard, called the book's Crimson Valor. You've also written on World War II, Lightning Down. You've written on a book called Reckless, the racehorse who became a Marine Corps hero, that a lot of people know about.
Marine Corps horse, yeah.
So you guys were a great combination, and this is an interesting book. May have the worst title I've ever heard.
Is it long enough?
It's more than long enough, but there's a reason for the title, and let's start there. The Kearsarge gets a direction, an order, if you will, and tell us about that, and that wraps right into the title, to the utmost ends of the earth.
Well, what happened was that most people know, if they think about the Civil War and any battles that were fought in the water, they think of the Monitor, the Merrimack, and they think about the inshore and the blockade battles as Confederate ships tried to escape Charleston, Savannah, other southern ports. But there was actually a sea battle that was off the coast of France between a Union ship and a Confederate ship. Now, the Confederate ship was the CSS Alabama, captained by Raphael Semmes, that had sailed in 1862 and had, for the next couple of years, it went all around the world finding and sinking Union shipping. Excuse me. And this was increasingly frustrating. It was damaging to the Union cause to some extent, because some of the things it was hoping to get from the Caribbean, from European ports, from elsewhere was just not arriving, because it ended up in the bottom of the sea. So the Secretary of the Navy in the Lincoln administration was Gideon Welles, and he summoned a man named John Winslow, who was a veteran Navy captain, Navy officer, and put him in charge of the USS Kearsarge. And Wells said to him, your mandate is go to the uttermost ends of the earth if you have to, but find and sink the Alabama.
Those are pretty broad orders for any Navy captain.
And Wells, the funny thing is about Wells, there were other ships looking for the Alabama. He didn't necessarily have a lot of confidence in Winslow. Winslow was kind of like a plodding officer he was a good seaman, and he was a good officer and very devoted to the Union cause. But he had not really previously distinguished himself as particularly dashing or spontaneous or all that successful in a way. So yet it was Winslow, whose doggedness turned out to be a advantage, who chased the CSS Alabama around the world, and finally cornered him, and it resulted in this amazing battle between these two ships, and only one of them would survive.
Well, it's interesting because the mission for the Alabama from the south was go to interrupt trade. We don't have a Navy that can compete, but let's go out there and interrupt trade. And boy, that sounds kind of like what we're going through today as Russia and Ukraine are battling and trade becomes a weapon of war, if you will. So as I read this, there are things that resonate even today.
Yes.
100 years later, if you will, about how the wars are fought and how folks go about them. So the Alabama you mentioned was on the seas for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody's ever been on a ship, you're going to go insane over 3 years. How did Raphael Simmons keep his crew together and actually stay provisioned and moving for 3 years, some 75,000 miles on the sea?
Well, for one thing, the Alabama was a brand new ship. It had been built in Liverpool, England, and so it was a state of the art ship for its time, and built to last, and built to be fast, and built to be strong. It overpowered other ships it encountered. So it had some endurance in it. Eventually, any ship at sea is in those days, certainly in the 1860s, is going to start needing repairs. It's going to start wearing out. There's a lot of wear and tear. The storms that you go through, barnacles, all kinds of things like that. So that eventually did add up for the Alabama, but it did have a captain that had great fortitude. And the other thing too about Semmes was that he was old for a captain. And so I don't want anybody to be offended when I say this, but he was in his mid-50s. Now, in his mid-50s today, you're still climbing mountains. You're doing all kinds of stuff. But in the 1860s, when the average lifespan of an average American male may have been 50, and not only was Semmes still alive and active, but he was the captain of the most successful Confederate ship of the Civil War. So he was. The crew, he had a good crew that believed in him, and so he could go into a port and they wouldn't just all run off and disappear. They did find that they found many friendly ports, certainly in 1862 and 1863. They found ports in Southeast Asia, in Europe, in South America. They went to Cape Town, South Africa, that were welcoming to the Alabama, because some of these countries, some of these people were actually in favor of the Southern cause. That changed in 1864. It was becoming more and more obvious that the South was had hit a point of diminishing returns, and some of the success of the Alabama had hurt some of the ports because Union ships were not coming there anymore, so that was hurting them and their economy. So it is very remarkable. 75,000 miles the CSS Alabama logged, and yet when it finally encountered the Kearsarge, they were going to fight. They were going to say, "Okay, we're tired. We're giving up." No, they challenged They were in the port of Cherbourg in France, and they said, "We're coming out. We'll meet you on the ocean."
Well, you mentioned that the ship was built. The Alabama was built in Britain, and that it had the advantages of friendly ports. It kind of again rang true with me as I'm reading this, the context of the importance of foreign countries, the role of foreign countries and maybe merchants and arms dealers in advancing any war. And there was sort of a subterfuge to get the Alabama outfitted with arms. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's up to me. That was a fun aspect of the story, because officially, England could not build a ship for the Confederates. That would give them a lot of trouble with the Lincoln administration, and who knows if that could have eventually, transformed into Union ships and English ships confronting each other on the high seas. So the Confederate agent there, who had money, and he had to have this ship built as if it was a private ship. And wink, wink. So it was an amazing ship. What they didn't do when it was built was put weapons on it, so they could still maintain the fiction that this was a private ship. So separately, the ship, when it was ready to go, and it had to sort of escape at the last minute because the Union was getting wise that this was going to be a Confederate ship, it left on a so-called training mission, or was going to see if everything was working all right, and it never came back. Separately, another ship was loaded with weapons, cannon, everything like that, gunpowder, and it rendezvoused with the Alabama. I think it might have been in the Azores, where the all this stuff was the guns were placed on the Alabama and locked in, and the ammunition and other supplies needed. And suddenly, the CSS Alabama was a warship, and a very, very powerful one.
And fully outfitted, although the fiction was it was, not a military ship and privately constructed in Britain. Again, kind of rings true for us even today how we play some of these games. Mm-hmm. One of the things I found really interesting in the book, To the Uttermost Ends of the Earth, by Phil Keith and Tom Clavin, there really was no significant northern or southern Navy at the time, and it was a very small military world of officers, and how all of these naval officers had crossed paths somewhere in their careers before they find themselves on opposite sides of the American Civil War. That was interesting history, and you really brought that to life for Captain Raphael Sims and Captain John Winslow. So I thought you did a great job with that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, most people they think about when the beginning of the war, as war was imminent, the Civil War was imminent, that officers, West Point graduates, West Point students, West Point graduates had to make these decisions. If a West Point graduate was a captain in the U.S. Army, but he was from Mississippi, do I join the Confederate States of America, or do I stick with the U.S. Army? But that was also true of Annapolis. Annapolis, I think, began as a U.S. Naval Academy. I'm going to say in 1845. It is in the book. And so you had the same thing. You had these graduates of Annapolis who they had to make this very tough decision, and they had crossed paths. A lot of these fellows in the years. I mean, Raphael Semmes and John Winslow had been friends serving on the same ship in the 1840s. So there are very difficult decisions to be made. And Semmes, who was a Southerner by birth, he made his decision to go with the Confederate States. John Winslow, I think, was born in North Carolina, if I remember correctly. Yet he chose to stay with the Union and keep his position in the rankings of officers in the Union Navy. But what you said before was very true too. The Union Navy, I mean, the Confederate States of America had no Navy when the war began, and the Union Navy had been downsized after the Mexican-American War, and suddenly, you have a civil war here, and they have to see what still floats. What can we put out there as a Navy?
And so if you're a naval historian or a Civil War buff, you're going to really enjoy that portion of the book, because it's going to tell you about how all those officers kind of crossed paths along the way and had to make these decisions. So folks who are in that category of historians will need to pick this up and read it. One of the things I found interesting and somewhat amazing, actually, was that the CSS Alabama, did I note this right? They captured or destroyed something like 66 ships?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the Alabama was faster and stronger than just about every ship it encountered. So especially the merchant ships. So they would fight. They would see these ships. They would chase them down. They'd make them stop, and they'd be boarded. Now, if a captain had papers that showed that this really was the cargo he was carrying really was French or English or German or whatever, then Semmes would recall his sailors and off they'd go in their separate ways. But if it was a cargo that was bound for a Union port and it was Union goods, then he would have the crew removed, and he would set. The other thing he would do, he would take the captain's chronometer. a peculiar kind of
a little trophy.
Yeah, from each ship that he took, he would keep as a keepsake the other captain's chronometer. He had this big chronometer collection in his cabin, and but he would remove the other ship's crew and then burn it, and everything on it, and it's kind of a poignant, because some of these captains, this was their life savings. This was what they did for a living, was transport goods. They were not necessarily, they didn't care one side or the other. My job is to transport goods, and they had invested in the ship, and so some of these captains had a pretty tough time watching their ships burn. But that was the way that Semmes was thinking, the best and the only way really that the Confederate Navy could make a difference in the Civil War was to make sure as few goods and other material as possible made it into the Union cause.
Well, again, it's back to its goal was to interrupt or slow down trade or make people think twice about shipping into the northern states, and it developed quite a reputation, and I'm sure it had that impact on folks. I think I noted there was something like 20,000 POWs taken off these ships and then released, and I'm sure every one of them went on and told the story, didn't they?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about the reputation that the Alabama had, because as time went on and there would be reports that would end up being published in newspapers in Boston, Washington, D.C., New York, about the Alabama, it became this mythical ship. It was everywhere. You know, in the same week there could be an Alabama sighting in the Caribbean. There could be an Alabama sighting in the Pacific, off the coast of Europe, off the coast of South Africa. So it intimidated shipping too. There was some captains that forget it. I'm not transporting any Union goods because I don't want to lose my ship. So that was like a ripple effect of its success. Was that the word you used, disrupt, is a very good one. It disrupted trade.
Well, for Captain Semmes, all good things come to an end when his old buddy Captain John Winslow and the USS Kearsarge happens to be in Holland, and the Alabama happens to go to France to get some of those repairs we were talking about earlier. And I don't know, if the Kearsarge was outfitted better, it had some unique maybe tricks up its sleeve, but talk to us about the final battle.
Well, the Alabama was at a disadvantage because fewer and fewer ports would accept a Confederate ship as the war ground on. And I mentioned before, into 1864. By then, Britain and France and Italy and some of the other places in the world that previously had been, okay, yes, you can come in here and stay for a while and make repairs. We'll give you more coal for your engine. We'll get you some victuals, so you could be at sea for another couple of months. Fewer and fewer of those ports were available, whereas a lot of ports were available to the Kearsarge. So if it needed repairs, it can get them done easily. If it needed to restock its food stocks, its coal for the engine, it could do that. So when the Alabama put in Cherbourg, they had hoped that they could stay for a while and get some absolutely necessary repairs done. The ship was in pretty bad shape by then. But even in Cherbourg, they were told, "Well, we'll let you stay for a little while, but otherwise you got to get out of here." We see which way the wind is blowing, and we don't want to have trouble when the Lincoln administration is up harboring a Confederate and maybe protecting a Confederate ship. So Semmes, instead of fighting that, and knowing that he sent a message to the Kearsarge, which had anchored outside the harbor. We're coming out, and on a Sunday morning in June of 1864, the Alabama left the protection of the port and came out, and it met. It was a duel, 1-on-1, the Kearsarge and the Alabama in the ocean off the coast of France, and it was a pretty fierce battle. I don't know if I want to give away the ending, although I think some people can probably imply what ended up happening.
They can, but I want to draw another parallel to this 1860s sea battle and what we do today. So today we're all kind of glued to our TV watching the Ukraine-Russian invasion and what's going on. How did the local French countrymen around Cherbourg react to this pending battle?
Well, that's kind of a humorous aspect of the book. At least I found it humorous. It was a spectacle. It was entertainment. It was watching gladiators in the ring. The gladiators happened to be two ships, and they came from all over. When it was announced that the Alabama was coming out to take on the Kearsarge, people came from the countryside into Cherbourg. They climbed on rooftops to see what they could from there. People were selling food. People were singing songs. It was a festival.
There were apparently you write there were train loads of people who came out to have a nice Sunday afternoon and watch the battle. Something like 19,000 people showed up.
And that was their television. That was
right.
They can watch from the viewpoint of the shore. I mean, obviously you couldn't see that well because the two ships had to be beyond French territorial waters. But it was very entertaining, and people were they were wagering. You know, it's like a sporting event now. They were wagering. Who's going to win? Okay, I'll put 10 francs on the Alabama. I'll put 20 francs on the Kearsarge.
Well, it's an entertaining book with a lot of history packed in there. As I say, a lot of different people I think would like this, whether you're a naval historian or a Civil War buff, or you were kind of interested in some of those early, how did Britain and how did France interplay into the Civil War. It's all in there, as well as this great story about these two captains and giving them real life, which I think you were trying to do, and you guys did a good job.
Thank you.
I guess, because we talked about it at the beginning, Phil Keith has passed away. How much of the book got done while both of you were working on it, and how much of it did you have to complete after his passing?
Well, that's a good question, because if I remember correctly, we had the final draft of the manuscript was due March 1 of last year. And so we turned it in on time. I know authors hate when other authors say that because it puts them under the gun. but we turned it in on time, and Phil passed away 10 days later. So I was tasked with doing the production chores and everything that the author does up to the point where a book is being published by myself. But it's amazing how often, like a copy editor had a series of questions. My first thought was, let me discuss with Phil, or I'll see what Phil has to say about this, or maybe I'll do this part of it and Phil will do the other part of it. And then, kept being reminded he's not here anymore. So there's a real, I'm excited about the book, To the Othermost Ends of the Earth. I think it turned out very well. I think a lot of it is because of Phil. And yet there's some sadness connected to its publication, too, because I know he would have loved to see how the book is being received.
Well, and you mentioned that in the last week or two you had the chance to meet up with his wife and have some lunch, and hopefully she also will feel this is sort of his last contribution to military writing and the history that he was so fond of.
And the Navy man, finishes up with a naval story. So
really?
It's kind of appropriate.
Yeah. No, it is. We want to recommend it, Tom Clavin. We really appreciate you taking some time again today to talk with Veterans Radio about the latest book, To the Uttermost Ends of the Earth. And Tom was prolific. I should say Phil was prolific, and I know you are too, Tom. You probably got the next one in the works already. Do you want to give us a sneak peek of it?
Yeah, I also collaborated with Bob Drury. Our last book was called Blood and Treasure, about Daniel Boone and the First Frontier. And for our next book, which will be out on November 1, it's called The Last Hill. And it's a story about the 2nd Army Ranger Battalion in the fall of 1944 in the Hurtgen Forest. So that'll be out November 1st, The Last Hill.
Well, we hope to get a copy of it and hope to have you back again, sure, Tom. Thank you for spending a little time with Veterans Radio today.
Thank you. I very much appreciate it.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Faussone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800. or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by going to veteransradio.net. And until next time, you are dismissed.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans' Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, NVBDC.org, VA Ann Arbor Health Care System, the Vietnam Veterans of America Charles S. Kettles Chapter, Ann Arbor, Michigan, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423 in Ann Arbor, and the American Legion Press Corn Post 46, also in Ann Arbor. And the Veterans Lending Council, which advises lenders, realtors, buyers about VA home loan program, and you can find them on Facebook. We appreciate all your support. You can go to veteransradio.net, click on the sponsor level, and continue to support keeping Veterans Radio on the air. And until next time, you are dismissed.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.